The Iowa Hawkeyes finishing off their regular season, as always, against Nebraska. This time under the lights on Black Friday. It's going to be freezing cold in Kinnick Stadium. We'll be anxious to see if it's actually a packed house. Of course, it's sold out. But Kirk Ferentz calling for a blackout, but the temperature's calling for potential for negative wind chills by kickoff, or at least close. We'll talk about that game and some stats to look for. I'll also give you my score prediction. I don't normally do that in these videos, but I'll do that for today. But first, want to thank our sponsors, one being Iowa Floor Covering down in Bondurant. If you have not seen Iowa Floor Covering, if you've not checked out what they have to offer, visit their website, iowafloorcovering.com. You can use the /DIY to learn more about their tough core click-together flooring that is great for you DIYers and you install it yourself type of people. If you want an affordable flooring for your kitchen, for your bathroom, for your living room, whatever the case may be, talk to the guys down at IFC. You can also call them once the holiday weekend is over, 515-379-7000. Also want to thank Randy Engel and his terrific artwork down at Under the Kitchen in Mitchellville. He's got deals with a bunch of athletes, Hawkeye athletes. Support NIL, support Randy, support the show by checking out his stuff over on Facebook. The link is in the description. You can also visit his website, underthekitchen.square.site. That's underthekitchen, all one word, .square.site. So your Hawkeyes play the Nebraska Cornhuskers under the lights on Black Friday. Yes, it's going to be cold. Typically, at least in recent years, we've had pretty mild Novembers and Decembers. Now, we haven't had snow yet here in Iowa, but the temperatures, the meteorologist calling for single digits potentially tonight in wind chill, possibly more. The winds are actually supposed to die down by the time we hit the evening hours, which is positive. But this game is going to be flirting with the coldest game on record, which I believe was 2013 against Michigan. I remember that game. Was not there, but do remember that game. It's amazing the fluctuation between September and November playing football in the state of Iowa. But I digress. This is a game in which Iowa can move to 8-4. Of course, neither one of these teams playing for anything other than bowl movement, neither team competing for the Big Ten championship game or the 12-team playoff. But Nebraska did qualify for a bowl game, officially qualify for a bowl game with their win over Wisconsin last week. They are now 6-5. Of course, the Red would love to get to 7-5 with a new OC that is Dana Holgerson, who has strong Iowa connections. Of course, he coached at Iowa Wesleyan with Mike Leach. So what to watch for in this game, which will feature a couple of young quarterbacks, one being Dylan Raiola, who was a 5-star out of high school, and one being a former walk-on. Well, no, I'm sorry, a current walk-on in Jackson Stratton, assuming he is the guy to go on Friday night. He is a walk-on from La Jolla, California, with one start under his belt. Well, a couple of things. Nebraska and Iowa very even in so many different stats. Just look at total offense as a whole. They're very close. Nebraska 11th in the Big Ten in total offense, Iowa 12th. Nebraska is just more balanced than Iowa is. I guess that's the easy way to say that. Iowa relies on the heavy run attack, and they're first in the conference in rush offense. They're last in the conference in pass offense. And some of that is they don't need to pass the ball as much when you have a dominant run game. So we recognize that. We acknowledge that. But Nebraska, middle of the pack in most categories. Now, Nebraska is sixth in the conference in rush D against that number one rush offense for Iowa. So kind of strength against strength. In fact, if you look at all those individual team stats, I really couldn't find one for Nebraska that was stronger than rush defense. So that maybe you could call their strong suit, their front four, their rush defense, going up against the best rush offense in the Big Ten in Iowa. Now, Iowa has had a lot of success on the ground all year, especially at home. We know the defense has struggled more so on the road. So that would lend me to believe that this will be a lower scoring game. We have not seen Iowa give up a ton of points at home. They did give up some yards against Washington, Will Rogers in that pass offense in October, but in general, they still held them down and ended up running that game out with flying colors. Now, Nebraska is fourth worst in the conference in penalty yardage. Iowa, amazing. They are best in the conference in fewest penalty yardage. Nebraska averages about 56 penalty yards per game. So that is an area where Iowa can potentially not just win, but dominate. And certainly penalties in a game that's close can make a huge difference. And this game, at least in recent history, has been close every year. Last time this game was not close, I think you have to go back to 2017 and 2016. Those two blowout wins for the Hawkeyes. Those were not close, but every other game since then has been relatively close. Both teams are good against third down. They're both average in third down conversion percentage. Iowa's done much better comparatively compared to last season and seasons prior in offensive conversion rate on critical downs. But both teams defensively are very good. They're both top 8 in that category. Now, Nebraska is also third worst in red zone conversion rate, meaning that Iowa's defense might be able to bend like they did against Washington, like they did in the first half against Michigan State, and might be able to come away without giving up points, because Nebraska has done that too many times this season. Now, Iowa's actually really good down in the red zone at conversion rate. They don't always get touchdowns, all right? But they're real solid at making sure they convert points if you look at the stats. But Nebraska at times comes away empty-handed. So we'll see how much Iowa bends. It's going to be cold, so it may be hard to throw the ball. Although those quarterbacks have hand warmers, they're going to be ready to go. I'm sure they're going to have those heaters on the sidelines, and maybe a little bit overhyped, the whole cold temperature thing. But it's a storyline nonetheless inside of Kinnick Stadium. And in spite of the fact that last week's game, in my opinion, was quite boring, Iowa's win over Maryland, it was a solid, dominant win. There was no crowd there. It was against a Maryland team that really couldn't deal with Iowa on the ground. I think this is a Nebraska team that can deal with Iowa on the ground. And this should be a fun game, not just because of the cold temperatures, but because it's at Kinnick. It's going to be rocking, regardless if there's some empty seats because people don't want to brave the weather. It's a rivalry game. It's a trophy game. Yes, it means something. So this should be a fun one. Dylan Raiola versus Jackson Stratton. Maybe we see a little Cade McNamara or Brennan Sullivan, but Kirk Ferentz made it pretty clear on Tuesday, even though those guys have been back at practice, he wants Jackson Stratton to play well and just play the entire game. He didn't want to play multiple quarterbacks, and that's consistent with Kirk Ferentz. So I will be live with you following the game. Here's the deal, folks. We got women's basketball starting basically during football, and we're going to be going live with Kasheen Alexander right at the conclusion of the women's basketball game. And then after that, we'll have a shortened post game there for women's hoops at approximately 10:30 Central Time Friday night. I'll be going live with Coach Don Patterson recapping Iowa and Nebraska football. Now, as it relates to my score prediction, I promised you that. The line has been moved to 3. I believe it opened around 5.5. I could be wrong on that, but it's been bet down to 3. I think that's pretty good. That's a pretty good line. Now, I'm not a betting guy and never will be, never have been. But I think Iowa wins this game by something close to a field goal. And as I talked about, these games have been close. How many times have we seen an Iowa kicker, whether it be Miguel Racinos or Keith Duncan, go down the list, guys that sank Nebraska with a field goal? So I've got the Iowa Hawkeyes winning this game. I've got a final score of 27-24. I've got basically a push if you look at the current line. 27-24, the Hawkeyes come out on top, and maybe it's a long Drew Stevens field goal. Wouldn't that be nice for a young guy who I think has an NFL future? We'll talk to you after the game right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm.